Sekeres Price for Thursday, February 15th, 2024. Coming to you from the Go-Go Sports Studio, built by Arbor Lee here at the iconic Wall Center, downtown Vancouver. Heading to a game? Why don't you extend your game night, make it a staycation? Book the Sekeres Price right here at the Wall. Call them 604-331-1000. Some blackout dates may apply. Matt Sekeres alongside Blake Price. Grady Sass hitting switches, conducting things with Madison Buckingham. Big show coming up, and it's all brought to you by Applewood Auto Group.
Applewood Kia in Langley has the 2024 Kia Niro EV and EV6, and with those, you get the complimentary EV chargers or a complimentary set of winter tires. That's all thanks to Kia Canada. So go check it all out. Applewood Kia in Langley. It's all good at Applewood.
Poll question today: will there be vengeance in Thursday's Red Wings Canucks game? Yes or no? You can vote at Sekeres Price on Twitter and YouTube. We asked this after the Nikita Zadorov hit on Lucas Raymond. A 2-game suspension followed. Some fisticuffs and fiery stuff after that hit in the hockey game. And then Jake Walman scoring and doing the Griddy dance. And we're still waiting for the code to get back to us to let us know whether that is a great offense, summary conviction, summary crown. We'll see. Anyways, could be spicy at Rogers Arena. Although I voted no because the Red Wings need the points, and more often than not, these things are overblown anyways.
My vote is no as well, and now we have an additional reason why that is the case.
Do we ever?
There's a lack of personnel to exact any vengeance.
So let's get to today's top story. Dakota Joshua, fresh off a career game against Chicago, where he has 3 points and the Canucks' first Gordie Howe hat trick since Tanner Pearson, will miss tonight's game. It's an upper body injury, feared a hand injury from the fight he got into with Mackenzie Entwistle, the end of the Blackhawks game on Tuesday, sticking up for Connor Garland. Rick Tocchet, head coach of the Canucks, confirming, yes, he does believe the injury was sustained during the fight. Ilya Mikheyev will skate on that fantastic third line with Teddy Bluger and Connor Garland. This get Nils Oman back up and centering the fourth line. But what a terrible break. And I hope I'm not using that word with a double entendre. What a terrible break for Dakota Joshua, who was having this marvelous season and was the best player on the ice Tuesday, to be missing this game.
Yeah. And, he does so because Connor Garland is dumped in that Detroit game or the Chicago game, and Joshua sticks up for his teammate. But
Garland said he owed him dinner after the game.
Yeah.
He owes him more than that now.
And in a vacuum, it seems like a really nice thing to do for a teammate. Yeah. Send a message. But if it ends up costing you games, and and for the Canucks' sake, let's hope it's not plural. If it's a singular game, or whatever, you can probably get through a single game. But my goodness, this line has gone from good to great to freaking outstanding here. And this is really the last thing the Vancouver Canucks need. That line single-handedly won them the game versus the Chicago Blackhawks. And the guy who gets his first career 3-point game now has to sit because of hockey code of, no, got to go exact some measure on the other guy.
At least they have Connor Garland's honor, right? Or his back, and speaking of the Gordie Howe hat trick, first from Tanner Pearson, let's hope the Canucks handle this hand injury better than Tanner Pearson's.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I mean, you got to be careful what you wish for here in today's National Hockey League. I mean, we've now sacrificed the quote-unquote goon for guys who can play but also provide toughness, like Dakota Joshua. But the problem is, when they can play, you value their play. You want them to play. Dakota Joshua will be very handy in the playoffs because he can play a stiff game. There's no fighting in the playoffs. There's just stiff games. So he'll be perfect. So, maybe just start to play your playoff hockey now and don't get sidetracked by shenanigans that can injure key players when you need them the most.
Big opportunity, Ilya Mikheyev, who is in a dreadful slump. How do you see him fitting on what has been a fabulous line with Bluger and Garland?
I mean, he's a pro. He attends to details well. So, I think he'll be fine. Chemistry is a funny thing, though. It's a fickle thing. What you see on paper from Joshua, Garland, and Bluger doesn't match what they are doing. Like on paper, they shouldn't be as good as they are, but they are as good as they are because it just works. So Mikheyev will be tough to sort of replicate that level of chemistry, but he's a good player and he's got good instincts, and he's been a little bit snake bitten, and of course battling this comeback from the knee surgery, so he's not as sprightly as he normally is.
Hasn't scored in 22.
Yeah, it's too long.
I mean, this is too long. That's more than a quarter of the season. So this is the opportunity that he absolutely has to take advantage of, dig himself out of this funk, because one of the questions I find myself wondering, and you and Jeff were early on this, I'll give you credit. I thought, hey, he's in a bad slump. He was a player this management group specifically sought out and paid handsomely in free agency a year ago, July. But I still considered him as factoring into the big picture with the Vancouver Canucks. I drew a distinction between his play, Andrei Kuzmenko's play, how it would jive with this head coach in the here and now and in the future. Now I'm wondering, Blake, do they have to upgrade Mikheyev by the deadline?
Well, this is it an upgrade at that position, or is it using that cap space for the defense?
Both.
Well, I don't know if there's enough cap space there to go around. But
either.
Yeah. And it's quite possible. It's quite possible. Of
course, the other guy who could nip at his heels in his playing time would be Phil Kessel, which we'll get to in a moment. But yeah, Mikheyev played 15 minutes, actually almost 16 minutes against Chicago. He played 13 minutes against Washington. This coming off 9.5 minutes against Detroit. That was a season low. And you've seen him tumble down the lineup here, no longer playing with Elias Pettersson, found himself on a fourth line, did get an assist in that Detroit game, and has 9 shots in the 5 games through February here. But this is an opportunity that I think Ilya Mikheyev has to, because the other thing about Mikheyev is, I think like Kuzmenko, he has some value on the trade market. Like, I think there are other teams out there that look at the size, look at the speed, and yeah, it's not all the way back. Look at a penalty killer, and he's not all that old, and think, this guy can play for us. This guy can be a part of our program over the next few years. So you're getting to the point where you may watch the value drop out if he continues to struggle much beyond where we're at now.
But I think the news is too far and wide now. Despite the numbers being respectable, the fact that if he was still really fast and had these numbers, I think you absolutely get interest. But I think word is out. He's not fast anymore. All these great metrics now that the NHL's released, he appears on none of the top 100 speed sort of bursts.
Right.
I mean, word is out. He's not the fast
does
guy
take
that
time
he was.
to come back from the ACL, so he's
totally
a potential rehabilitation project. But
he might get it back, but it's not there now. So I think if you're an acquiring team, you're pretty cautious about that.
All right, let's get on to Phil Kessel here, who, incidentally, is does have an Ironman streak going. Failed to mention this yesterday. 1,064 games for Kessel. We talked about this with Frank Corrado, that you look his hockey DB page, all you see is 82 down the left-hand column, except for the interrupted years, pandemic and otherwise, and he played all those games as well.
I think he's ready for that to end, though. I think he knows that's over.
Well, and it would seem like Phil Kessel might still be a ways from Vancouver. Yeah. Rick Tocchet saying at Rogers Arena this morning he needs to go to Abbotsford for, quote, a while. There was video yesterday of him skating at Abbey Center, courtesy of CTV News. He did not look particularly great. He hasn't played in 10 months. Here's Jeff Patterson. Just watched a chunk of the raw video of Kessel from yesterday morning in Abbotsford. Very much looked like veteran who's been away from the game for a while. Not the finished product, but some serious struggles.
Didn't do himself favors.
Drills.
It looked like his pants weren't fully done up per se, so he looked a little bit wider than I think he maybe could have. I think most of that was just he was a little disheveled. He was a little unkempt.
Well, he's always disheveled and unkempt. Isn't that part of his charm? Like we talked about, he's kind of a throwback.
If you're on YouTube looking at it, I mean, that's he's not exactly done up there, so he looks wider. He looks puffier than I think he probably could have. Yeah. So he didn't do himself any PR favors there. But yeah, I mean, bent over a lot. And hey, given the time off, and given what we've seen from other players coming back from injuries or pseudo retirements. And jumping back, like this is normal. The question is it useful for the Canucks for them to monitor a guy like this for a couple of weeks? And certainly, an AHL PTO or even an AHL contract in and of itself is a possibility before they actually pull the trigger on an NHL contract. There's no hurry.
I don't know about that. I would think his agent is directing him to a place that intends to assign him to an NHL deal. Now, Tocchet characterized it as a look this morning, but I do think the Vancouver Canucks are hopeful that Phil Kessel looks good enough to sign to an NHL contract. In fact, I wouldn't even be surprised if they're already at terms with Kessel's agent and are just waiting to see how he looks here this week. But again, I think they're hopeful that he looks good enough to sign.
Well, of course. Well, that's why he's there. But I'm saying to get him into a handful of AHL games, there's paperwork to do there. So we'll see if that paperwork happens. There's 2 games at home versus Calgary for the Abbey Canucks this weekend. So that lines up well. Doesn't even have to leave the Lower Mainland, which is attractive, I'm sure, for the NHL player. I'm sure in his mind's eye, he was thinking, I'll play those 2 games and I'll be good to go. But that'll be up to Canucks management to decide if that is the case or if he needs to play more.
Darren Dreger saying on Overdrive yesterday that there's 3 to 4 teams in the mix potentially that will want to sign him if the Canucks don't want to. And just for the people reading in too much to that clip, it's his first organized practice in a while here.
Yeah.
And
if he looks like that in a week or so, then okay, there's going to be issue, but come on, first time back.
Well, more on his fitness level in a second, but first, J-Pat writing for Canucks Army and got my new Canucks Army hoodie on.
Very nice.
Blake, thank you to our folks who sent me one. Jeff wonders where the fit is roster-wise here with the club. Now, who knows? This Dakota Joshua injury, if it's serious, might solve all this, but and Jeff wonders, are you okay losing a DiGiuseppe, an Oman, or a Lafferty on waivers to make room for Kessel? For me, not Oman. I think Oman factors as a centerman, as a penalty killer, as cheap labor for next year. He's under contract, $825.
I think both those players are very useful depth in the playoffs.
Yeah, DiGiuseppe's under contract next year too at $775. So who knows? Someone may take a crack on him, much like the Canucks did. Lafferty's a $1.1 million guy. He's a UFA to be, but he can play center and he's got wheels on a team that doesn't have. And he's a bigger guy. So for me, if I have to make room, well, first of all, you have to feel like Kessel's an upgrade. If you feel like Kessel's an upgrade, for me, the guy I would risk losing is Phil DiGiuseppe, even though he might be the best of that trio in terms of playoff style hockey.
The difference is, I mean, you get pretty late on the waiver wire because I don't think in it like a team rebuilding, a younger team, I don't think they're picking them up. I mean, it could just be a body to get you to the finish line if you're a Chicago Blackhawk team or something like that. But I don't think PDG at his age is going to be a huge guy in demand. That would be my guess.
Mm-hmm. No, I wouldn't think so either, but all it takes is one.
Lafferty got some headlines this season, so I think that he would get claimed, and Nils Oman at his age.
Well, Lafferty went for something last year at the deadline with Toronto, if you remember that deal with the Leafs.
And his goals at the start of the season got him some notoriety. So I think he gets claimed, and so does Oman.
This from former Vancouver Canucks executive Jonathan Wall, who tweeted last night, I'm sure the story is out there somewhere, but I remember watching players gut out the skating beep test. The test is brutal and buckles many elite athletes. I overheard that the best ever at the test Phil Kessel. He beat the test. There were no more stages left.
Yeah, I mean, this goes a little bit to what we talked about with Frank Corrado yesterday, if you missed it. I mean, he's got a strange ability. You know, for the story Frank told you yesterday, if you missed it, folks, was, you know, on summer vacation, guys would be working out nonstop. He'd go away for a few weeks to go to the beach. He'd come back and he'd still be lifting stronger and better than the other guys that never left the gym. So
I believe it was fishing, not the beach. If you look at his complexion, that's definitely a fisherman,
probably
and not a beach goer.
But the story stands. Now, eventually that goes away. Speaking
well,
from
that's it. You know, there's some athletes that just come out of the womb with natural strength or natural speed or gifts that just can't really be explained. It's not that necessarily that they worked on them or anything like that.
But time waits for nobody.
Oh, it's Father Time undefeated.
So eventually that metabolism, that ability to bounce back, eventually it disappears for us all. Has Phil reached that? Hey, I mean, Mats Sundin was a specimen in his time. You remember what that looked like? God, it looked like he had been showered by a fire hose after the first period.
As somebody who covered Sundin during the height of his career 10 years earlier, or 8 years before his tour here with the Vancouver Canucks, hardly recognized the guy.
Right.
He looks so aged. And the good thing about it is Mats knew he wasn't trying to fool anyone. You remember how short those shifts were early in his Canucks tenure?
Like 17 seconds.
Only Nikita Trampkin did shorter shifts than Mats Sundin when he first got
It was like he went and like,
oh, here's Big Sundin over the boards.
He touched the 4 offside dots and get right off the ice. Yeah.
Pass it over to Mats. He dumped it in and went for a change. Shift length, 13 seconds.
It was comical. We made comments on it. It was a lot of fun.
Jonathan Lekramaki, Canucks prospect, and look, one that I'm sure that other teams are asking for the bigger name trades here in advance of deadline. First round pick from a couple of years ago, World Junior MVP, and he's got his first multi-goal game in the Swedish League today, including an absolutely dazzling goal. And you know, I read a deeper dive on Lekramaki here recently, if I'm not mistaken, with Scott Wheeler on from The Athletic, and talked about he's more than a one-trick pony now. That offensively, prior to this season, he was very much a, shooter, great shot, score a lot of goals from certain areas. But now he's getting a little more inside, that he's got a more diversified game, that he's creating as much as scoring. And, we see some of that, and plus the confidence you can tell is really coursing through the young man after a fantastic showing, MVP at the World Juniors. That video we showed on the YouTube side, courtesy of Sport Canelin. What do you think? Do you think he's untouchable as far as the Canucks are concerned, or does all in mean all in? And for the right deal, Lekramaki, could be moved.
He's done everything he needs to do to remain a top prospect for this team. After a bit of a speed wobble post-draft, of course. And yet, when I watch some of those highlights, he doesn't look like Patrick Laine at that age. I'll say that.
Well, Laine's a huge man. Like, what are you talking about?
Just hey, the goals are going in. You can't argue with it. He is scoring from distance, but I don't know that and again, I'm judging from afar watching on highlights.
Very few score from distance in the NHL.
Yeah.
So if your question is, can he be the rare distance scorer in the NHL? The hedge is no.
Is he a special goal scorer? And I just don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know that based on the video that we have access to and what we've seen at the World Juniors and all that sort of stuff. I don't know that I've seen and again, that doesn't mean that's the final definitive word. But based on the information that I don't know that I've seen like a special thing. You'd hate to lose it because, again, he's still a top prospect, not debating that in the least. But there is still that level above. There's the Connor Bedard level that's above, and he's nowhere near that, So
For me,
Okay, let me turn it around.
Okay.
The 2025 first or Lekramaki?
The 2025 first, it's further away.
Yeah.
But Wielander, Lekramaki, I think I would want to keep Wielander.
Yeah. And again, he's
just
not
because of the right shot profile of defenseman. He's a sublime skater.
And he's not projected as a number one defenseman.
No.
So you got to, maintain the proper perspective there too. But I agree, he's still the rarer commodity, I think.
I would feel better about my ability to go out and replace goals.
Yeah.
Down the road than I would feel about replacing top 4 right shot minutes.
Yeah.
Right side minutes.
Mm-hmm. And to me, he strikes me as a guy that could be a little bit like Besser, like a goal scorer for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But not necessarily a guy that's
the speed isn't dazzling here, although
right.
He skates.
He's like
there's probably better in Besser.
There's not one jaw dropping element necessarily to his game. Like his shot's good. His shot's good, but I don't know that it's. I don't know if it's a laser beam.
I think I'm a little higher on the shot and some of the dangles than you are with him, but I understand where you're going.
And I want to repeat,
level of analysis.
I'm not down on him. I'm just saying there are levels of excitement, and mine is
Well, and the other thing,
out of 10,
reason
not 10 out of 10.
we're going through this exercise, folks, is you have to have a critical eye with your own guys.
You got to make tough decisions. You have to make tough decisions.
Because there are some really difficult decisions that are going to affect not only the immediate future of the Vancouver Canucks, but the near and long-term future of the Vancouver Canucks.
Yeah.
And it is incumbent on Jim Rutherford, Patrick Alvin, and their fleet of scouts and evaluators to have these sorts of discussions before a trade deadline. Because you never know. You could wake up on the morning of trade deadline and suddenly somebody is available who you didn't think would be available. You didn't think you have a chance at, who can improve your hockey team, but the ask is big.
Yeah.
And the ask is big because it's a difference-making player. Speaking of, Jake Gensel. Oh. Here's why you get your business done early, folks. Jake Gensel missed the final 12 minutes of the Penguins' loss to the Florida Panthers on Wednesday night. So you're looking at potentially the premium player, the premium winger available on the trade deadline being hurt at this point. Upper body injury. We'll see where that goes. But the Penguins, with that loss, continue to languish. And you tell me whether you think they're still in it. There's also a school of thought now that Pittsburgh may not want to sell off at the deadline just because San Jose owns their first round pick and they don't want to go through the indignity of watching a potential lottery winning pick slide to the San Jose Sharks. Wouldn't that be a story?
I mean, it's not going to be a top odds pick, but it could slip into the lottery for sure.
It would give San Jose 2 cracks, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, we'll see where the Gensel injury. Last I saw, he was off to be evaluated. Upper body injury.
I saw some Penn's Twitter explosions of, okay, it's over. Let's sell off. Let's liquidate.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
I mean, it's pretty packed still in the Metro, but they are 7th of 8 teams. The Pittsburgh Penguins are next to last in that competitive Metropolitan Division. They do have games in hand on everybody above them, but it's a sight to see Sidney Crosby's Penguins 7th place in the division. It's a little odd.
I was explaining to my parents yesterday because, I mean, they follow hockey, but not all that closely. They asked me about Sidney Crosby, and I said, well, there could be a really big decision coming down with Sidney Crosby. But I go, he hasn't made it out of the first round in 6 years. They're like, really? Yeah, that's how long it's been.
And I don't get it.
It has been a crashing.
I don't get it from club, and I know people like there. This thought is always shot down. He's retiring as a Penguin. He's retiring as a Penguin. I personally, from the player and club perspective, don't understand it. Like, I don't think anybody begrudges the Bruins for Ray Bourque playing in Colorado. I don't think anybody begrudges the Bruins again for Bobby Orr playing in Chicago. Or like,
would you begrudge the Canucks for Hank and Danny playing elsewhere?
given the losing, given the losing that we saw, let's say 2 years previous to their no. If that would have catapulted the Canucks rebuild further, no, I wouldn't.
It's submitting to a competitive disadvantage, because the alternative, you trade the player and you get assets back that help you long term.
Yeah, I mean, it's
if you negotiate no trade clauses, no movement clauses, and the player says, "I don't want to go anywhere."
Yeah,
then I understand it.
Yeah, totally. But then again, from the player's perspective, if you're Sidney Crosby, who's a very smart guy, he knows he's not winning a cup there. Not in the next. I mean, if he hangs on for 5 years, 4 years, maybe he can win.
And that's in part because Rutherford sold the farm to keep that going.
So he knows that. Deep down, Sidney Crosby knows that. And some guys are okay just riding it out in the sunset and sort of taking the minor victories. Can we make it to the playoffs again? Some guys are okay with that. They've won the cup. But if the goal deep inside Sidney Crosby is to win one last cup before he retires, it's not happening there.
I'm going to invoke the, hey, everybody can be traded. Wayne Gretzky was traded, but I don't mean the Edmonton LA deal. We're both old enough to remember Wayne Gretzky is the St. Louis Blue.
Yeah.
For the playoff drive one year, right?
That's right. He was a trade deadline fodder.
He was a trade deadline St. Louis Blue.
Yeah.
His wife Janet is from St. Louis. They wore those god-awful uties with the red stripe.
Brett Hull was there. Yeah.
And he was in St. Louis for a minute, and then he was off to Broadway to finish his career.
Weird.
4 teams.
Yeah.
For the great one, number 9. And as you mentioned, 2 teams for number 4, Bobby Orr. But Pittsburgh, 66 was only a Penguin.
And it's a very American thing, I think, to try and hold on to the player for, I shouldn't say it's American. It's a very NHL thing to try and hold on to the player for the entirety of the career because it looks great on the back of the hockey card. But really,
and also because you have people who feel emotion and sentimentality towards the player.
Completely.
If they're at that level. So it's a community thing on top of.
But playing 8 seasons and moving on is a little bit different than playing, whatever it is, 16, 17 seasons. Like the bond is not going anywhere. You'll still have the bond.
More on the trade deadline front. Some reporting from Michael Gallagher in Nashville. I've heard that the UC Saros Preds situation is a little more serious than, quote, just taking calls at this point. Barry Trotz went on local radio in Nashville and said, quote, me and Tom Fitzgerald talk all the time with goaltending. He always circles back and I go, this is what we need if we do something like that. I don't need a goaltender. He does. So Barry Trotz, new GM, openly talking that one of his counterparts is calling on UC Saros. I wonder if that's a violation of GM code.
Yeah.
Anyways, we knew New
He's
Jersey.
a new GM, remember. 2 new GMs, kind of.
Well, Fitzgerald's been there a while.
Yeah,
He's been re-signed. New Jersey sniff around Jacob Markstrom and UC Saros. Meanwhile, it sounds like Colorado is interested in Jake Allen, the Montreal goaltender, but of course that would be more insurance than frontline starter. My question for you, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday, are we going to see 2 goaltender trades like blockbusters, Saros and Markstrom? You don't see those a lot at trade deadline.
No.
Ryan Miller comes to mind way back when, going from Buffalo again to St. Louis, but you don't tend to see frontline goaltenders. Kevin Woodley thinks Jacob Markstrom should win the Vezina this year based on ClearSight Analytics and the work
saves above
expected.
Yeah.
And speaking of ESPN goaltender rankings today with Greg Wyshynski, Thatcher Demko comes in 3rd behind Vasilevsky and Connor Hellebuck.
I would love to go back in time and see how many times a traded goalie at the deadline makes a notable difference. Not wins the
Griddy,
cup.
Goalie guy Griddy. Does anyone jump immediately to mind? Goaltender.
Notable trade deadline acquisition, and not like a December trade. Deadline. Like I can't think of too many. Because usually it's a bit of a desperation move. Oh crap, our guy isn't good, or oh crap, our guy just got injured. And you kind of just settle, I think, more than anything.
I'm going back to Dwayne Rollison going to the Oilers, the 06 Stanley Cup.
Was that
deadline?
Was that a deadline move?
I can't remember.
I mean, in the month of February, I'm fine with, but That's before then. I don't know.
Ryan Miller was,
Yeah.
But he did not play well in St. Louis. That did not
No.
work out,
No.
as I recall.
That's sort of my feeling is that it rarely works out. So yeah, that'll be interesting if
When
they pull
did
it off.
Fleury get traded from the Blackhawks?
Well, Fleury again to the Wild was late too, wasn't it?
Yeah, you're stumping me.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So it's a little uncustomary, and we thought LA was going to be in on something. We thought maybe Edmonton was going to be in on something, but with Hellebuck's win last night, I don't know if you saw that stat too. Games above 900 save percentage so far this season. Demko is number 2 behind Hellebuck on that list. Stuart Skinner was like number 5 on that list. He's ended up being something for the Oilers, so they're off that list.
Remember, Ben Bishop went to the Kings from the Lightning when they had Vasilevsky.
Yeah.
But I don't even know if the Kings made the playoffs that year.
Ben Bishop could have been a
monster.
He was a monster, and he was amongst the top
ever?
goalies in the league. If he didn't have injury issues, he would have been
Great kid, too.
Oh.
He was always smiling in dressing rooms. He was on that St. Louis team that the Canucks beat in 08 or 09 as I want to say as the third goaltender.
Was he?
Yeah, he was
Yeah.
up and coming.
Yeah, that's right. The deadest man walking in the National Hockey League is now dead. Metaphorically speaking, of course. Jarmo Kekalainen fired as the general manager of the Columbus Blue Jackets. Everybody in the world knew this was coming. Because the Blue Jackets have been putrid, and he has had several opportunities to execute a plan and has failed.
Botched the coaching thing this year, too.
Then he botched the Mike Babcock thing this year. Ownership put out a statement on the eve of the season saying we're not making changes now just because it's the start of the season, which effectively told Kekalainen, you're done. It's only a matter of time. Well, John Davidson, the president there in Columbus, is going to handle GM duties alongside the staff internally for the moment, but says they will look outside the building for Kekalainen's replacement. Darren Dreger is also already speculating that perhaps Jeff Gorton, the Montreal Canadiens president of hockey operations, would reunite with Davidson. They worked together in New York with the Rangers, saying that Gorton is a GM at heart and that Kent Hughes is doing a lot of the lifting in Montreal. That's the other thing we got to praise the Canucks for. I mean, because nothing has seeped out to suggest that Rutherford and Alvin aren't on the same page and that there are no egos out of joint here, right? Because I read that from Dreger and I went, I wonder if Gordon's a little out of joint here.
Maybe.
Anyways.
The fact that, he's even bringing it up. Leads you to believe there's some flames.
And, now, because we've been spending a lot of time talking trade deadline and potential trades, you may remember that Columbus was the very first team, like a week or two into the season, after yet another dreadful start, where we were talking about a sell-off there. Jack Roslovic is the one UFA, Andrew Peak, Adam Boquist on defense. Elvis Merzlikins has openly said, I want to trade. So you wonder whether John Davidson and this ad hoc GM by committee staff of his now finally gets to the business of making some of these trades. And is there someone there for the Canucks?
Oh, boy.
Because we've had that discussion several times this year.
There's some depth players. If they are nibbling around the edges, I don't think there's any of the top 4, top 6 options that we've been talking about, but around the edges, perhaps.
Okay, let's get to today's menu. Big show, as mentioned, coming up. Welcome, Matt Falls, on the podcast side. We will talk to Patrick Johnson of the Province and Post Media on all the relevant topics. Bad blood, Kessel, this third line, Chris Tanev. Gets to some hashtags, the best and worst of Twitter, featuring Tiger Woods and a golf voice for the ages. Rob Williams is going to join us. Costco was trending yesterday in Vancouver.
Oh, why could that be?
There was a Canucks tie-in, and not just because it's across the street from Rogers Arena. And we'll talk some football as well, with the BC Lions continuing CFL free agency and a terrible, terrible scene and event in Kansas City Wednesday.
Best Bet's a presentation of sports interaction, your homegrown sportsbook and casino. Where are you going? I'm going rather pedestrian today myself.
I was digging around the menu
Yeah.
And an interesting prop on the NHL specials tab.
Oh, okay.
Over under 1.5 trades by the Leafs. Now, I'd sure like to see this prop for other teams as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm taking the over because new GM there, Brad Treliving, right? Probably wants to fashion his own team.
Yep.
Right on the playoff bar, fighting for it. Upward mobility. So I'm going to say more than 1.5 trades for the Leafs from this point forward. I'm going over. It pays 180.
I was planning on going Leila Annie Fernandez's way in the semifinal in Qatar, but she lost in the quarters. Nice run, though, for Leila Annie Fernandez.
Yeah, I guess.
You saw Rebecca Marino won a little challenger event.
Oh, I did
last
not.
Week too?
Oh, good for her.
Yeah. Anyway, the Arizona Coyotes, they're back up against the wall. If they think they are still in the playoff race, they
lost to Minnesota last night, did they not?
They best keep winning or start winning at the very least. Have visiting Carolina Hurricanes tomorrow. It's 2:55 straight up on the hometown Coyotes. And how often will we be able to say that going forward?
Right.
At Mullet Arena. 2:55 on the Yotes tomorrow. Versus
Yeah,
the
they
Kings.
lost 3-1 to Minnesota in a battle of teams just barely clinging on to Western Conference wildcard hope.
And that is our best bets, brought to you by Sports Interaction, your homegrown sportsbook and casino. They got props that speak to the Vancouver sports fan, plus the best-in-class casino with thousands of games and live dealers. It's Sports Interaction. Bet local, must be 19 years of age. Please play responsibly. If you don't have tickets for a big game at the rink, go to Greta Bar, 50 West Cordova Street, and you can soak up the atmosphere, whether you have tickets and are walking to and from the rink or not. It's a great place to catch the game. And for road games, of course, like February the 22nd, cheer them on at Greta Bar. Spend $10 on a ticket at nationgear.ca. Proceeds from the night with Canuck Army and Sekeres Price. Go to Canuck Place Children's Hospice. We'd love to see you there. February 22nd, Greta Bar, 50 West Cordova.
Great Clips is the official hair salon of the National Hockey League. There are 37 salons in Vancouver and the Lower Mainland, all Canadian-owned and operated. Download the app and find the nearest to you. When you're up next for a cut, you'll get a Ready Next text. Great Clips. It's going to be great. Patrick Johnson covers the Canucks for the Province and Post Media. He joins us on Thursdays.
He's covering the wrong Canucks this week, though. Should be out in Abbotsford.
It's true.
Yeah. Where were you in Abbey yesterday for Phil Kessel?
I wasn't. Listen, I wasn't. He's not talking.
Oh, we touched a nerve. He's coming up firing.
Did Coos go?
No. I talked to Jim Rutherford on the phone and got a very nice article.
I saw that. So why don't you take us through it? What were the big hits?
Well, the usual question, you wake up, everybody, first of all, ask Abby PR, is there any chance Phil's talking to you? No, and he's not, first of all, not under contract, so he can do what he wants. Second of all, it's the AHL, there's no rules. So if you were under contract, it's up to them. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't happening. So I'm like, well, how do I do the thing that nobody else is doing? Well, let's see if I can get the president on the line. And he's always... he's proud of his team and he's ready to set the tone of what's going on. And so I thought about depth and what does Phil Kessel represent? Someone made a really good point to me this morning that, as much as the vibes are fun, right? Like the vibes of the Kessel story is fun. But the reason why you even look at a player like this, and this is why the depth question is there in general, is Jeff Tambolini was in the top 6 in Game 7 in 2011, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so if worse comes to worse, and you have to fit somebody in on Elias Pettersson's wing, who do you want, Phil Kessel or Linus Karlsson, right? Like, It's those kinds of questions. And, the funny thing was that person mentioned this to me was that was actually something that kind of came up in our discussion. I didn't really play into it too big. Maybe I should have made a reference in the story in hindsight. But, Rutherford said, listen, part of what you do when you're looking at depth, absolutely we look for depth, right? I've always done it. Because part of it is you game out, like, what if? All the what ifs you can imagine. What if we have to replace this guy in the lineup? How can we patch things together? What if this person gets hurt? Who could actually fit in to a role over and above even what we have now? What would your lineup look like this? And so, that is why you look at a guy like Phil Kessel. Like, he's like, listen, the guy's won. We need to see if he can play. We don't know if he can play. And, I think he was very honest about that. I think they like the person, but, he hasn't played since Game 4 of Round 1 last year. He wasn't playing a ton. He did play an entire season for Vegas, though. He is the reigning Ironman man in the NHL. But that's the question is. So if you're looking for depth, it's not just it's not just a case of, do we need a number 8, but could we pick up a guy who could slot in? You look at that 2017 team, Rutherford traded for Mark Streit, who played a bunch of games down the stretch and then played 3 games in the playoffs. Like, you add guys because you are worried about the worst case scenario.
That's the most likely scenario for sure, and that's wherever I think most sane people went. Is there a non-zero chance though that he's going to be brought in to replace somebody that will be traded to get depth for the defense core?
Sure, that's possible. I mean, they have about, right now as it stands, they have about $2.6 million in cap space to work with, and there's some decent defensemen. I mean, like, you look at guys they know well, like Chad Ruedel, who's obviously a pure depth guy in Pittsburgh and always been that. He'd be cheap. But Justin Schultz, say in Seattle, if Seattle decides they're out of it, he's on $3 million, so you'd have to get some retention there. But yeah, like there are players above that, Chris Tanev, that if the price for retention is too much to pay, but if you can find a way to unload, I don't know how you would do this at this point. I don't think there's a whole lot they're trying to get rid of on this roster at this point. But yeah, of course there's a scenario if you get aggressive. I don't get the sense they're going to be overly aggressive at that kind of move. Okay. I do think the focus now is depth, and that they're going to find because in the end, right now, who's the number 8? It's Mark Friedman. Like, he's like had a nice season, but you'd like to think you can do better. You can find a guy that's got a little more experience, a little more perhaps reliable, a little more tooth to his game, playoff hockey. Like, Friedman's been fine, but do you need a guy that can fill in? What happens if Nikita Zadorov gets suspended again? Things like that. How do you fill out your roster?
You love that Mark Streit example, huh?
Yeah, but it stands out to me.
I think 3 weeks running now, boy.
But it stands out to me.
Sponsoring
well,
this hit?
All right, fine, Ron Hainsey, right? But like,
there we go, Hainsey.
But like Ron Hainsey was picked up in 2016 and ends up becoming a key player for 2 seasons. Trevor Daley, like these are the points, right? Like, he picked up guys who play, and then he picked up guys who didn't even end up playing for his team. Justin Schultz was another one.
Trivia for the two of you. You're right, Jeff Tambellini played in Game 7 in 2011. 2 wingers played in that game and had less ice time than Jeff Tambellini. Who were they?
Wow. Oh, my goodness.
2 wingers for the Canucks in that game.
Mason Raymond, because he got hurt. Was that Game 7?
No. Played in Game 7.
Okay.
And played less than Jeff Tambellini. 2 wingers. Maxime Lapierre actually played less than Jeff Tambellini in that game, but he played down the middle.
You're right.
On the 4th line. Who were his wingers?
God.
Rafi Torres and...
No, Torres was up lineup.
Chris Higgins somehow?
No, Chris was up lineup.
Victor Oreskovich?
Very good, Grady Sass.
Oh, good one.
He was in Game 7.
He played Game
No
7.
wonder they lost.
He played 5 minutes and 46 seconds. And then this next gentleman played 8 minutes and 19 seconds.
Alex Bolduc. I don't know.
No. Tough guy. Also cerebral.
Aaron Volpatti?
No. Good shout, but I believe Volpatti came later.
Yeah.
Think Scrabble.
Tanner Glass.
Tanner Glass. Well done. Do you
never tell you my Tanner Glass? Tanner Glass's now wife was a student teacher in a class I was subbing for, like the next year, I think, or that spring. Anyway, it was fun.
But once again, that factoid underscores depth and the importance of it. Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure the 4th line and 3rd line were better at Game 1 of the playoffs that year. Mm-hmm. But this bottom 6 is potentially a lot better than the bottom 6 of the 2011 team.
Well, certainly better than Oreskovich, Glass, Tambellini.
Yeah.
You mentioned Tanev. Do you think they do their 2025 first rounder for Tanev?
I was sitting there staring at you look at that wonderful cap-friendly page, which has all the players, and then it has all the picks across the top. And I found myself looking at that, and I think I feel like if they're sitting there going Chris Tanev, I think they think Chris Tanev is the kind of guy that would do exactly like would take them to a next level, right? Like I think that's the kind of trade they really want to make. If he is the guy and the alternatives are simply just not anything close, I think they probably would look long and hard at it. I know they obviously recognize the value of a first round pick and a second round pick is massively bigger than 3rd, 4th, 5, 6, 7, right? Now, obviously, trading away this year's first round pick where it's going to be like pick 30, as I've mentioned before, is a lot easier to stomach than the complete unknown that would be next year.
Like, what if they take a step back next year?
And we should
that's what I
clarify,
mean.
like,
yeah.
We'll see how far they go in the playoffs, right?
Yeah.
Like the final 4 draft spots are set by the conference.
Right.
Finals,
but I'm still saying it's high 20s, right? You're going
yeah.
26 or whatever.
If they finish first overall, then if they fall short of the conference final, it comes in at pick 28.
Yeah.
So
yeah. But and so it kind of comes back. Yeah, what happens if they fall back? Like they are clearly going all in. Like we know this. So and they know there is a lot of risk. There's a lot of contracts that they have of players who are not under contract for next year. Not just Elias Pettersson, but obviously mostly Elias Pettersson. And the roster next year is going to look very different. I mean, even this year, like you can take the lesson of what Rick Tocchet's lineup looked like when he started just over a year ago. There are 11 guys gone from that roster. Like they've turned over a lot of players. Now they haven't turned a lot of players over the top of the roster. They're probably going to have to do that for next year just because. But yeah, like that to me is the question. And I sit back, like that is the price. If Chris Tanev is so far over and above all the options in front of you and the price becomes next year's first round, like you may just have to bite that bullet because that's a player I think that really does improve you. And it's also keeping that player away from Edmonton, right? Like that's part of the equation, right? That goes into all of this. It's not just what you can do, but it's keeping other teams from doing stuff.
Just before we leave Kessel, is this in the bag that they're going to sign him? Or if he doesn't look good here, like could they possibly just say thanks but no thanks, Phil?
I mean, I think as I said before, like he is a sort of a plan C, right? Like they are giving him a skate, they're having a look. There are 31 other teams in the NHL. Whether he wanted to come only to Vancouver, I don't know, but I don't expect that's the case. I think the guy just wants to play. So there are a lot of good teams in this league who have said, no, he's not up to it. I mean, the Stanley Cup winner in the end said he wasn't up to it. There was a great interview by Luke Fox from Sportsnet during the playoffs, during the Stanley Cup final, where he wrote about Phil Kessel, the healthy scratch. And it was all basically what a good culture guy he is. But Bruce Cassidy was very honest. He said, listen, I think Michael Amadio and William Carey bring more to the table than Phil Kessel does at this point. And Phil Kessel had played, like I said, 82 games that year. They knew exactly what he was about. And he'd been fine. He'd put 36 points or something like that, right? Like he had not been a nothing player. But at this point in his career, he's a fourth liner who's going to help your power play out, who's not going to, you're kind of not, he's not what he was at all. Even in 2016-17, he was a bit of, he was playing with Bonino and Hagelin, right? A bit of a soft minutes third line that did awesome. One of the great third lines, but had to be managed even then. And that's 7 years ago. So no, I don't think this is locked in 100%. I think it's highly likely it happens. But they're in, he's got today, he practiced yesterday. Obviously, everyone I think seen the video by now. Practice today, practice tomorrow. They've got a couple games this weekend against Calgary. Then they go to California next week. I my guess would be, you sign him to a PTO at some time in the next week so he can play some games. You've got the deadline in 3 weeks. You want to have him secured on your roster if you are going to sign him, because you're going to have to waive him to stash him in the minors, because I assume that's going to be part of this story.
But you sign him to an AHL deal first, don't you, so that you can play him?
Well, you need him on an NHL deal before the trade deadline, right? Because
right. Yeah. But right now,
so you have some time.
Sign him.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You have a little. Yeah, you have some leeway, right? But you have to have him on an NHL deal and on your one of your 50 contracts by March 8th, right? Like that's the only thing that we're looking at.
It's just there's a little risk for Kessel to take an AHL deal, because then he's potentially in purgatory with no chance to sign with another
elsewhere
AHL team. But I hear what you're saying, and it does seem
AHL PTOs are a thing too. So you can do that.
So I would think,
I
would think. Speaking of keeping the bands together, I was thinking about this yesterday. We asked on our poll question, can they afford to keep this great third line together for next season with Bluger and Joshua being UFAs? Do you remember that one deadline where late blooming Alex Burrows had the screws put to him by management? Hey, we got a hell of a deal here for you, or you can sign this 4-year, $8 million, $2 million per year contract. And Burrows, having never hit the jackpot as a professional hockey player, bit, and it turned out to be maybe the great value contract in the NHL time. Any chance they go to Joshua here before the deadline and see if he's willing to bite?
Yeah, I mean, I think if he's smart, he's just saying, I'm going to see how things go in the summer. Like he's having a great year. I absolutely, I think the Canucks would be saying, we would love to keep you around. Here's what we're thinking right now. I mean, I don't know how likely it is that he really would do that. I think he likes it here. He's I was saying to someone the other day, like selfishly from media standpoint, he's been one of the good ones this year. Like he's a really smart, you can tell he's comfortable. He feels good. Obviously he's playing great. I think the Canucks, I hope, are being realistic on this one, because you don't want to overpay for the person's first good season. And, you don't want to that's the lesson forever that this team, the past management team never learned, was don't overpay for the guys you really like. Overpay, we shouldn't overpay for anyone, but pay for the things that actually are going to help you win. And those are the guys at the top of the lineup. And guys in Joshua do get squeezed. So I could see it happening. I'm not sure it would, but you never know.
It's a lot to ask, and term is going to matter to him as well. So to Matt's point, if you overpay on term, you might be able to keep the number down a little bit. But has that third line changed your opinion?
And that was the genius of the 4-year deal with Burrows, right? Like
sucker him in with the term a little bit. Has the sheer amazingness of this third line changed just the overall outlook of them staying together for next year, the three of them?
Well, go back to the Kessel story, right? I mean, in many ways, Connor Garland's kind of the Phil Kessel of this line, right? Like he's the guy who's driving the offense. Bonino was a good two-way player. Hagelin, good two-way player. I mean, the way this has worked out, I think a lot about Patrick Alvin when he was telling us about Teddy Bluger last summer. And I think this guy could score 15 goals. I don't think Teddy Bluger's going to score 15 goals, but Teddy Bluger's had a very strong two-way season, better than I think we possibly expected he would. And I think a lot of that is Connor Garland. I think Dakota Joshua really finding his way, finding himself to the next step after the tough love from Tocchet. There's a lot in this line, and it's kept going. And there's not a lot in it. A lot about this line that tells you that it's an illusion. Like, I think this is kind of real. They're very good in terms of puck possession. Obviously, the straightforward, straight ahead game that Bluger and Joshua play, with Garland doing all these wild things with the puck. I mean, as I wrote a month or two ago, like Joshua saying, you guys really got to keep your stick on the ice with this guy. It is something, I'm sure it is something to keep together, because you found something there, and it's something that is hard to find. And God knows we've seen this team struggle over the last decade trying to find a proper third line, not just a center, but a proper third line. I think if you can keep this together, absolutely. But it is at the same time, Connor Garland's making a lot of money, and that's going to make it hard to devote much more money to this third line. That's the other thing to think about, is how are you laying out your money? Obviously, the cap goes up, and Tyler Myers' contract's coming off the books, but there's also the OEL buyout going on there, and you're going to have to hopefully find a raise for Elias Pettersson, and Philip Hronek's obviously getting a big raise. It's not, the priority list is going to be that, and then you're going to see what's left to deal with a guy like Dakota Joshua.
Okay, lastly, do you anticipate, answer our poll, do you anticipate bad blood? Will there be vengeance at Rogers Arena tonight?
Get real. No, it wasn't. I mean, I wasn't there. There weren't many reporters there on Saturday to ask about what happened, but it's just, if they had done something, maybe, but like, they want to win the game, right? Like their coach, Rick Tocchet, will be telling them, guys, let's win the game and let's focus on how we play. Let's forget about how they're celebrating goals. I think it's that simple. No, there's not going to be nothing tonight.
Well, of course, it could go the other way, right? Like the Raymond hit, the hit from Zadorov on Raymond, they might still be sore.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. If we're talking about that, sure. I think there could be something about that. Sure. Zadorov's first game back, but I don't think
flipped him just like that.
Are you covering this game, Peach?
Well, no. I mean, sorry. I thought no. Hold on.
Here tonight.
No, because everybody's been talking about the nonsense in Ottawa. That's what I thought you were asking about.
Okay.
Sorry, that's what I thought the specific question was. Yeah, sure, the Zadorov stuff, absolutely. But sorry, I thought you meant in terms of response to the post-game celebration.
I'm teasing it. We sort of meant that. We also sort of meant the hit on Raymond, which was not a good one and a deserving
bad hit. Yeah,
but at some point, the guy got suspended. There was...
Well, yeah, but that doesn't always,
No, the guy got suspended, but my feelings are still hurt?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that still happens. Sure.
Hockey player feelings.
Yeah, it's a big thing.
They're complicated. They don't manage them well.
Yeah, they bruise easily.
Just talk about it, guys.
I don't... Yeah, I mean, the Zadorov, sure. I don't... There very well could be something he'll have to...
Raymond took a second hit in that game, if I'm not mistaken. Poor guy was being ragdolled. All right, Peach. Great stuff. Thanks for being a good sport. We'll catch up next Thursday.
Take care.
Hey, everybody. If you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.